The night my husband slapped me, I didn't scream. I walked out and never looked back. He thought I was weak. But while he chased his mistress and clung to control, I reclaimed his empire. Piece by piece, signature by signature, I took everything. Now he lies paralyzed, forgotten. And I stand at the top of the world with a man who never once tried to silence me. I didn't inherit his legacy. I took it, with silence, strategy, and my name on every building he thought would bear his. I don't remember the pain of the slap as much as the silence that followed. It echoed, not just in the air but in the places I'd spent years defending. It shattered the last illusion I had about Damian Reed. The man who once called me his princess in the rain. The boy who held my hand at my grandmother's funeral and whispered he'd never let anyone hurt me. Now his hand had done what no enemy had managed, left a mark on my skin. We stood in our living room, just the three of us. Me, him, and her. Sienna Vale, the porcelain-skinned intern with a syrupy voice and weaponized helplessness. She stood behind him, barefoot in my silk robe, hands trembling just enough to look fragile. The picture of victimhood. Never mind that she had climbed into my marriage bed, sipped coffee from my CO mug, and sat smugly in my chair the moment I left town. "She's just a girl," Damian said, breath shaky. "You were going to hit her, Camille." "No," I replied. "I was going to ask her why she was in my home." "You looked ready to pounce." I turned my head slightly. Interesting projection. He took a step forward, eyes flashing. "You don't have to twist everything. She didn't mean any harm." "She meant every harm," I said. "But the real question is, why did you let her?" He didn't answer. Just stared at the reddening mark on my cheek. I touched it absently. The skin felt warm. The sensation was dulled. "I think it always is when a part of you finally breaks." Sienna whimpered behind him. "She's so scary, Damian." "She's my wife," he barked, not in defense but as a reminder. "A complication." I turned to him one last time. "And you're not my husband anymore." And with that I picked up my coat, slung it over my arm and walked out of the penthouse in complete silence. He didn't follow me. It had rained earlier. The streets still glistened under the Manhattan skyline, a mixture of oil, light, and regret pooling at my feet as I wandered nowhere in particular. The city kept moving. Taxis honking, pedestrians shouting, someone laughing drunkenly near a corner deli. But inside me, everything had gone still. I didn't cry. Tears would have suggested I hadn't seen this coming. In truth, I had. I just didn't want to admit it. Damian hadn't fallen in love with Sienna. He'd fallen out of love with a woman he couldn't control. He resented my power. My boardroom victories. My unapologetic standards. The very things he once bragged about when introducing me. Camille Hart, my fiancée. She once scared 3 venture capitalists into giving her double the ask. Now that power made him feel small. And so he looked for something soft. Malleable. Obedient. He found Sienna. That night I didn't go to a hotel. I returned to the brownstone in West Village I had kept in my name, the one Damian always hated for being too cold. It was empty, of course. Dusty. Quiet. But it was mine. The marble counter. The walk-in wine cellar. The rooftop view. I poured a glass of wine, washed the slap from my cheek and stared at my reflection. No tears. No cracks. Just a cold woman with sharper eyes than before. I opened my laptop. Not to file for divorce. But to begin the kind of plan men like Damian never see coming. The kind that doesn't start with screaming. The kind that ends in silence. Permanent silence. 3 days passed. In that time Damian called once. I didn't answer. His mother called twice. She left a voice message that began with, "Camille dear, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding," and ended with a veiled threat about family reputation. I sent it straight to archives. On the 3rd morning I opened my curtains and saw something odd on the front security monitor. A body. Just beyond the outer gate. Slumped. So, I zoomed in. Male. Young. Soaked from head to toe in freezing rain. Head down. Shoulders shaking, possibly from fever. My first instinct was, ignore it. Not your problem. But some part of me, the part that hadn't gone completely dead, reached for the intercom. "Who are you?" I said into the mic. No response. I watched for another 30 seconds. Still nothing. Then I sighed, buzzed open the gate and made my way down. He was unconscious by the time I reached him. His hoodie was threadbare. His shoes had holes. His hands, calloused. His face, though half hidden under wet hair, had a boyish structure, high cheekbones, and faint bruises blooming across his jaw. "Help me bring him inside," I told my housekeeper. "Upstairs guest room. Turn on the heat. Get towels." She blinked. "You know him, ma'am?" "No." "Then why?" "Because he'll die if I don't." And for some reason I couldn't handle that kind of silence. He didn't wake up for another 12 hours. By then I had already ordered blood work, run a background check, and confirmed through a contact in the 6th precinct that his name, Elias Ward, came up clean. No warrants. No pending charges. No history of violence. Just a 19-year-old boy with nowhere to go. I stood at the doorway as he opened his eyes for the first time. Disoriented. Blinking at the white duvet. Then at me. His lips parted. "No words." "Before you ask," I said. "You passed out at my gate. You're in one of my guest rooms. You're safe. And you're not under arrest." He tried to sit up too quickly. Winced. "You might have bruised ribs," I added. "And a mild concussion. So don't be a hero." His voice was hoarse. "I didn't mean to trespass." "You didn't," I replied. "You collapsed." He looked away as if embarrassed. "You hungry?" His stomach answered for him, a low, angry growl that filled the silence like thunder. I stepped aside. "Come downstairs when you can. There's soup." Later, as I watched him eat, I didn't feel pity. I felt curiosity. There was something in the way he sat. Back straight, shoulders curled inward slightly, like someone taught early not to take up space. He looked up only once, offering a quiet thank you. I nodded. I didn't know then that Elias Ward would soon become the axis on which my world tilted. That his silence would soothe mine. That his hands, rough with labor, warm with honesty, would one day hold my broken pieces without asking to fix them. All I knew then was this. He had nowhere to go. And I had an empty house. Elias didn't ask for anything. Not a bed. Not money. Not even permission to stay. The next morning, after I found him half frozen at the gate, I came downstairs to the scent of lemon and rosemary wafting from the kitchen. I expected the housekeeper. It was him. He stood barefoot on the tile floor, sleeves rolled up, flipping something golden and fluffy with the kind of focus usually reserved for surgery. The sight of this near stranger, bruised, quiet, barely 19, humming softly as he maneuvered my copper pan felt so absurd I almost laughed. "You cook?" I said flatly. He startled, spatula mid-air. "Sorry. The groceries were still fresh and I wanted to say thank you." I raised a brow. "For the hospital-grade care or the guest suite with heated floors?" "Both," he said, then added sheepishly, "and for not calling the cops." He served me pancakes without asking. Light. Crisp on the edges. Zesty enough to surprise me. I didn't thank him. But I didn't stop him either. By day 3 he had fixed the broken lock on the back gate, replaced a faulty light switch in the laundry room, and organized the pantry alphabetically. I watched in silence. By day 5 I gave up pretending he wasn't helpful. I found him folding towels in military perfect lines on the 3rd floor. "You were in the system," I said casually. He looked up startled. "For a bit, yeah. Group homes mostly. Never anything long." I nodded. "You don't steal. You don't snoop. You cook better than half the chefs I've hired. I'm glad I'm not a burden." I tilted my head. "I didn't say that." He looked stricken for a moment before I sighed and added, "That was a joke." His laugh was small. Honest. Almost bashful. It unsettled me more than it should have. That evening I called my private investigator. She'd already pulled his full file. No priors. No warnings. Nothing off. Just tragedy. Elias Ward. Born in Brooklyn. Mother died of an overdose when he was 7. Father crushed in a scaffolding accident before he turned 10. Moved through 6 foster homes. Emancipated at 16. Worked construction, odd jobs, anything that paid. Got scammed by a Craigslist rental and lost all his savings. Hadn't slept under a real roof in weeks. But not a trace of deceit. No strings attached. My brow furrowed. People like that didn't exist. So what was his angle? The days blurred into soft habits. A fresh mug of tea at my elbow by 8 a.m. tools neatly put away before I had to ask. My favorite wine chilled when I got home from board meetings, even when I never told him which brand I preferred. He didn't talk much. But when he did, it was always something disarmingly observant. "You don't flinch when people lie," he said once while washing dishes. I blinked. "Should I?" "No. It's just, your eyes go colder." I didn't respond. But later that night when I stared at my reflection before bed, I realized he was right. On a Monday evening I came home late from a gallery launch. Elias had waited up, apparently worried. His eyes widened when I entered, not with fear, but that unmistakable flash of concern that doesn't come from obligation. "There's dinner," he said, pointing toward the warm tray. I sat in silence, letting the silence stretch between us like an old scarf. Then he walked toward me, slowly, like approaching a wounded animal. "I have something for you," he said. From his pocket he pulled out a small pendant, aged, gold-plated, with a scratched moon and star pattern across the front. "This was mine," he murmured. "Only thing I kept from when I was little. My dad gave it to me before he died." He placed it in my palm and closed my fingers around it. "It used to be my most precious thing." Pause. "Tao you are." Something inside me lurched, like a piano chord struck too suddenly. My throat tightened. I looked up at him. He wasn't flirting. He wasn't smirking. He wasn't trying to seduce. He just meant it. That made it worse. "Why would you give this to me?" I asked, voice quieter than I expected. "Because you gave me a place to belong. I gave you a bed. And pancakes. And safety," he said. "That's rarer." I swallowed. My chest felt too tight. "Don't romanticize kindness," I said, sharper than I meant to. "I'm not," he said gently. "I'm just grateful." He turned, gave me a small nod, and padded quietly out of the room. I sat there with the pendant burning in my hand. My first instinct was to return it. But I didn't. I wore it the next morning under my blouse, not for him. For me. A reminder that something still genuine existed in a world filled with polished lies. That afternoon, I poured a glass of Malbec, leaned against the kitchen island, and stared at the contact in my phone I hadn't touched in 3 days. Damien Reed. My husband. Technically. I unblocked the number. It rang once. Twice. And then of course she answered. "Camille," Sienna's voice sang sweetly. "I was wondering when you'd crawl back." "Still answering his phone, I see," I replied, swirling the wine. "I mean, he's busy," she drawled. "But I'll pass on your desperate sobbing if you'd like. You can beg. We're used to it." There was a rustle on the other end, followed by Damien's voice. "Camille." I took a slow sip of wine. "Tell your little intern she forgot who owns the deed to that penthouse." "You wouldn't dare." "I already did," I said and hung up. I didn't wait for the fallout. I left the glass half full on the counter, went upstairs and opened a new spreadsheet. In the corner of my screen, the soft glint of Elias's pendant caught the light. And for the first time in weeks I felt warm. Not from the wine. Not from victory. From knowing I hadn't fallen apart. Not yet. The first time I took Elias to a public event, I wore the same dress I had worn to Damien's re-election gala 2 years prior. Emerald silk. Sculpted bodice. Diamond slit. A dress designed to be remembered. That night, Damien had kissed me on stage. Called me, the heart behind the Reed legacy. I smiled through clenched teeth while Sienna hovered in the front row, 2 seats away from his mother, wearing an identical shade of lipstick to mine. This time I walked into the Waldorf Astoria with Elias Ward on my arm. In a perfectly cut navy suit, no tie, hair swept back, his eyes scanning every face like he'd memorized my enemies. He didn't ask why I brought him. He simply matched my stride and offered his hand when we reached the ballroom door. "You look untouchable," he murmured, just loud enough for me to hear. "Good," I said. "I'm counting on that." The whispers began before we reached the champagne tray. "Is that her assistant? Isn't he young? She must be unraveling." Elias heard every word, I was sure of it. But he kept his expression neutral, professional almost. Like a well-dressed bodyguard with impossibly kind eyes. He didn't cling to me. Didn't play the doting boy toy. Just stood with measured distance, always a step behind, alert but never stiff. The performance was flawless. I smiled more that night than I had in months. Not because I felt happy, but because I finally felt in control again. People don't know what to do with a woman who refuses to shatter. Damien arrived fashionably late as always. Without Sienna this time. He walked in alone, tailored, smug, and clearly under the illusion that his presence still dictated the temperature of any room he entered. His eyes found me almost instantly. Then they fell on Elias. I watched the confusion bloom into recognition. Then disbelief. I tilted my glass toward him in a silent toast. Elias followed my gaze, then leaned closer and murmured, "That him?" I nodded. "That's Damien Reed, CEO of RGC Holdings. My husband." "Technically." Elias turned his eyes back to him, not with fear or envy, but calm, casual scrutiny. I had never seen Damien look more uncertain. He approached later, of course. The man could never resist a dramatic scene. We were standing by the gallery wall, me sipping Pinot Noir, Elias reviewing the silent auction items. "Camille," Damien said, tone perfectly rehearsed. "You look radiant." "Because I removed dead weight," I replied, glancing at my empty ring finger. He flinched, then tried a smile. "I didn't expect to see you here." "With?" His eyes flicked to Elias. I raised a brow. "With someone who knows how to show up?" Elias turned then, offered a courteous nod. "Mr. Reed." "Do I know you?" Damien asked. "No," Elias said, smile soft. "But I've seen what not to be." The silence that followed was delicious. Damien's jaw twitched. "Are we really doing this in front of half the board?" "We're not doing anything," I said. "You're just witnessing the consequences of your choices." He stepped forward, voice low. "Camille, you don't have to turn this into a circus." "I'm not," I replied. "But if I were, I'd make sure you were the opening act." Tragic. Predictable. And already forgotten by intermission. Elias rested a gentle hand on the small of my back. Subtle, grounding. We walked away before Damien could recover his smug expression. Later that week, a gossip blog posted a blurry photo of Elias and me arriving at my West Village brownstone. Caption read, "Ice Queen's cub? Camille Hart seen with mystery younger man. Source says he never leaves her side." I expected Elias to bring it up. He didn't. Instead, he spent the afternoon organizing contracts for a property transfer I had been delaying. Then helped draft a statement for an upcoming shareholder vote, carefully adjusting tone, legal implications, and brand positioning. "You're good at this," I said, reading through his final draft. "I like learning how things work," he said. "You don't want attention?" "God, no." He laughed. "I want to be useful." That, I realized, was the difference. Damien needed praise. Elias needed purpose. I spent most of that evening curled on the rooftop patio, sipping tea instead of wine. Elias sat on the far end, sketching something in a notebook I hadn't seen before. I watched him for a while, the way his brow furrowed, the way he absently bit his lower lip when he concentrated. He didn't notice. "Why haven't you asked me anything?" I said finally. He looked up. "About what?" "About Damien. About why I let it go on so long." He closed the notebook. "Because I figured you'd tell me when you wanted to." I blinked. That was the first moment I realized I was falling into something I didn't have a name for. I did tell him eventually. Bits of it. The first slap, not the recent one. The metaphorical one. The one that came the night Damien told me I was too intense to be a mother. That I drained the joy out of everything. How I shrank after that. Smiled less. Apologized more. How I started dimming my light so he could shine. "I was so afraid of being left," I said, "that I didn't notice I'd already been abandoned." Elias said nothing. Just placed a folded blanket over my shoulders and went back to sketching. That night I didn't sleep well. But I didn't feel alone. 2 days later, Damien tried again. A dinner gala for the Heart Foundation. One I funded, one I used to host. He cornered me just as I exited the ballroom. "You're making a fool of yourself," he snapped. "With that kid. Do you even know what people are saying?" "I do," I said. "They're saying you look older than your age. And that I traded up." "You're acting out. That's not you." I stepped closer. "No, Damien. That is me. The version of me that you tried to bury." He tried again. "We were good once." "No," I said. "I was good. You were lucky." I walked away. He didn't follow. Later that night, as Elias and I sat in my office reviewing charity proposals, I paused and asked, Do you ever think I'm being cruel? He tilted his head. To who? To Damien. No, he said simply. I think you're being deliberate. And to you. He smiled. You're the only person who's ever looked at me and expected something real. That's not cruelty. That's kindness. He didn't say it in a way that asked for more. But part of me wanted to give it anyway. He picked the rooftop bar. Of course he did. It overlooked the skyline, featured a view of the Empire State Building, and had just enough soft lighting to make broken things look polished. It was the kind of place you picked when you wanted to appear in control, without actually having any. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not because I cared, but because I knew he wouldn't. Damien Reed walked in 10 minutes late, no tie, top button undone, a cologne that reeked of desperation rather than power. His smile was rehearsed, but his eyes gave him away. He looked unwell, desperate, and scared. Camille, he said, settling across from me. You look incredible. I know. He blinked at my tone but didn't push. Instead, he placed a thick envelope between us. Settlement terms. I think they're fair. You keep the brownstone and the stocks. I keep RGC and the legacy pieces. I didn't touch the envelope. You assume I came to settle. Damien tensed. Camille, we don't need to drag this out. The media's already circling. You really want to make a show of this. You made a show the day you slapped me for your mistress. His lips thinned. I apologized for that. No, I said. You minimized it. You justified it. You never apologized. Silence. He drummed his fingers on the table. Fine. You want a confession? I was angry. You were pushing me. But I never meant to hurt you. I sipped my cocktail. Intent doesn't absolve harm. He laughed bitterly. Still quoting your therapist? I leaned in. Still pretending to be someone worth saving? He stood suddenly, grabbed the envelope and stormed toward the balcony. I followed, not out of concern but curiosity. He stood near the edge for stories up. A height survivable, but painful. He looked back at me, eyes wild. Is this what you want, Camille? Do you want me broken? Fine. And he stepped up onto the ledge. I didn't blink. You think I won't do it? I tilted my head. I think you will. Because theatrics are all you have left. His jaw clenched. I'll be paralyzed. You'll be blamed. No, I said softly. You'll be pitted. And then forgotten. He hesitated, a flicker of fear in his eyes. But pride outweighed common sense. And Damien Reed jumped. I watched him fall like a broken god. For stories. Right onto the jagged landscaping I'd had replaced the night before. The original mulch and foam rocks had been swapped for slate and shattered stone, by special request. Just in case. His body twisted midair before slamming into the garden bed with a sickening crunch. There were screams. Phones. Someone called 911. I remained on the balcony, eyes steady, heart rate unchanged. The world finally understood what I had always known. Damien Reed was not invincible. The diagnosis came in faster than expected. Multiple fractures. Nerve damage. Spinal trauma. Permanent paralysis from the waist down. When I arrived at the hospital, I wore white. Perfectly pressed. Impeccable makeup. Hair in a sleek chignon. Eyes rimmed in gold. Just enough to look saintly in the cameras that followed me into the building. Sienna was in the waiting room. Still dressed like a trophy but wilting now, her lipstick smudged, mascara clumped. I stopped in front of her. You look pale, I said gently. Was it the blood or the guilt? She opened her mouth. I raised a hand. Don't speak, I said, smiling. You've already done enough damage with your mouth. Inside the room, Damien lay like a fallen statue. His once proud posture collapsed into tubing and wires. His arms worked. His jaw clenched. But from the waist down he was a monument to every warning I ignored. He looked up at me. Camille. I sat beside him and took his hand. Not kindly, but theatrically. There were cameras watching. You jumped, I whispered. All to stop me from leaving. You didn't stop me. You just broke yourself. His voice cracked. They said, it's permanent. I know. Silence. Then weakly, what now? I leaned forward, lips almost brushing his ear. Now, I said, I take over everything and you will watch from distance. He flinched. Mrs. Reed burst into the room minutes later, tears streaking her cheeks. You monster. You drove him to this. I turned calmly toward her. Your son climbed onto a ledge like a child and flung himself off it. All I did was let gravity take its course. You're unstable. Vindictive. You'll ruin the family. I stood. I am the family. She stepped forward, a slap loading behind her eyes. I caught her wrist mid-swing. Careful, I whispered. Your son tried that already. Look how he turned out. She trembled. I dropped her hand and walked out of the room with my heels clicking like war drums. 3 days later I assumed full control of RGC Holdings. Damien's shares were transferred to my oversight through medical proxy. His mother's board vote was suspended due to emotional instability. Sienna was evicted from every property with her name on it. All by the book. All signed. All final. I sat at the head of Damien's old boardroom, crossed my legs, and looked over the empire he used to lord over. It had once belonged to him. Now it obeyed me. As I left the office that evening, my reflection caught in the glass doors. I didn't see the betrayed wife. I didn't see the angry widow in waiting. I saw Camille Hart, cold, reborn, and finally free of pretending. Damien wanted me broken. Instead, I became his reckoning. The official press release read, in light of Damien Reed's medical leave, Camille Hart Reed has assumed full executive authority at RGC Holdings effective immediately. What it didn't say, but everyone knew, was that I hadn't stepped in to save the company. I had taken it. Every inch of it. I reorganized the executive board in 3 days. The men who used to accidentally talk over me during investor meetings were now silent, nodding under my leadership. HR policies were overhauled. Departments reassigned. All RGC documents now bore my name, my signature, my stamp. By the end of the second week, I had transformed Damien's empire into my stage. And I made sure everyone knew it. Mrs. Hart, my assistant, called from the door. The new media strategist is waiting. Send her to Elias, I replied, eyes never leaving my laptop. Yes, ma'am. Elias handled most of the behind-the-scenes now. He never overstepped. Never tried to insert himself where he wasn't needed. But every major change I made, from internal messaging to public-facing rebranding, bore his quiet fingerprints. When I wanted the press silenced, he drafted the legal phrasing. When I wanted Sienna erased from our public records, he personally filed every asset revocation. When I wanted Damien's image to remain untarnished for the sake of legacy, he edited the official statement line by line. He was not just loyal. He was essential. The first gala I hosted under my reign was a charity auction. Lavish, and public. I wore crimson satin, a callback to the dress Damien hated most. I arrived without shame, without an escort. But Elias, of course, walked 3 steps behind me, dressed in black on black, perfectly pressed. The whispers began the moment we entered. That's him, right? The boy toy. She's flaunting him now. Yes. I was. Because Damien had paraded Sienna like an ornament. And now it was my turn, not to gloat but to reclaim. Elias wasn't there to be gawked at. He was there to remind them that I chose power on my terms. Across the room I spotted Sienna, predictably overdressed, clinging to a man with fading hair and newer shoes. She'd been removed from all RGC properties. The car Damien once gave her now parked in my garage. The Cartier bracelets repossessed. Every cent she drained now traced, frozen, and reallocated to a women's shelter in her name. She smiled when our eyes met. I didn't. I raised my glass, turned slightly toward Elias and said, she always wanted to be me. Now she gets to watch me. Elias murmured, do you want me to walk over? No, I said. Let her rot where she stands. And we left her behind, just like the gift receipt for the necklace she never returned. That evening I visited Damien. He sat propped up in the rehab suite, eyes dull, voice barely audible. No more theatrics. No more threats. Just a man who used to believe he was untouchable. I pulled a folder from my bag. Divorce papers? He rasped. No, I said. A copy. Then I shredded them slowly, 1 page at a time, letting the pieces flutter to the floor like snowflakes. You're not getting free that easily, I said. You're insane, he hissed. No, I smiled. I'm methodical. He tried to sit up further, winced. You still want to stay married? Yes. Why? Because when your mother dies and the estate transitions, I inherit everything as your legal wife. He stared at me. I'll stay married to you, I whispered, until your name no longer holds value. Then I'll discard it and you'll rot alone. No, Damien. I'll rule alone. As I walked out, Elias waited by the car. He opened the door wordlessly. Did he sign anything? He asked as I slid in. No need, I said. He's already given me everything I wanted. We drove away slowly, my silhouette reflected in the tinted glass. The woman they said would never survive. But I hadn't survived. I had taken the throne. It started with a headline. Queen of Ice, Prince of Construction, Camille Hart's boy wonder or real partner? They used a photo of me in a black velvet coat, stepping out of a car with Elias behind me. His expression wasn't love-struck or shy. It was alert, proactive, present. That was the image that caught fire. We weren't just gossip anymore. We were myth. I can issue a cease and desist, my publicist said as she handed me the morning clippings. The tabloids crossed a line. Boy wonder. Really? I read the article in silence. The tone was mocking, but even that couldn't hide what was obvious now. They couldn't ignore him. Elias Ward was no longer the stray boy I pulled off the pavement. He was standing beside me. And the world had noticed. Elias of course didn't care. When I showed him the headline he smirked and said, I look good in black. You look like security. I am. He said it so casually I almost dropped my pen. 2 weeks later he launched a nonprofit. The Heart Resilience Fund. I found out at a press conference. The moment my name was unveiled on the foundation banner. The cameras caught my reaction. Surprise softened into something dangerously close to emotion. Elias stepped up to the podium clear-eyed and calm. She saved my life, he said. This is how I return the favor, by helping others like me find shelter, education, and purpose. I watched him from the front row. Not as an accessory. Not as a decoration. But as a man who now moved with intention. Measured, intelligent, self-possessed. The press stopped calling him the stray. They started calling him the successor. That night, we walked the marble halls of my penthouse in silence. He handed me a glass of water, then gestured toward the window. The skyline blinked like a restless heartbeat. You knew about the press, didn't you? I asked. I knew they'd come eventually. You don't mind being called names? He turned to me. You were called worse. You didn't flinch. I swallowed. That's different. He shook his head. No, it isn't. They hated you for being strong. They mock me for standing next to strength. It's the same fear. His eyes met mine. I'm not afraid of being yours. I turned away, suddenly unmoored by the simplicity of his words. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. But I wore the pendant he gave me. Every day. Even when no one could see it. In public we became inseparable. Not romantically, not yet. But visibly. He escorted me into shareholder meetings, whispered legal loopholes before votes, stood by my side at charity events like a shield no one expected to be warm. Even the old guard started to acknowledge him. He's got steel, one board member whispered to me. And no ego. Unlike Damien, who once stormed out of a meeting because a secretary dared to offer him water before I arrived. One afternoon I found Elias sketching again, the same notebook from the rooftop. What are you always drawing? I asked. He hesitated, then passed it to me. Inside were lined sketches of buildings, room layouts, a few floor plans. But then I turned the page and froze. There I was, mid-step in one of my gala dresses, head turned, eyes narrowed in thought. He captured me, I thought. Not just how I look, but who I am when no one's watching. You make me easy to study, he said. I handed the book back without a word. Damien called twice that week. I didn't answer. Instead, I focused on acquisition deals. On international expansion. On repurposing the Reed Family Trust to fund the Heart Innovation Campus. A move that would officially remove Damien's name from the future of tech. Elias drafted the transfer documents. I didn't have to ask. He knew what I needed before I did. At a private gala in Vienna, I introduced Elias as my partner. He looked at me surprised but said nothing. It was the first time I gave him a title in public. And the last time anyone dared to refer to him as a toy. You could have married a senator, my friend Zara teased as she helped me adjust my earrings backstage. I did, I said. He turned out to be a fraud. She paused. And Elias? I didn't answer right away. Then, he's the one I should have met first. Later that night as we walked through the gardens I asked him, do you ever wonder why I let you stay? He glanced sideways. Sometimes. Why haven't you asked? Because I think you needed someone who didn't want to own you. We stopped walking. The moonlight cut across his jawline. He looked almost unreal. And now? I asked. I just want to stand next to you, he said. That's enough. My throat closed. For a woman who'd spent a decade being dragged behind a man, that was the most romantic thing I'd ever heard. As the new Heartread flagship campus opened in Brooklyn, in Elias's old neighborhood, I stood before the crowd and delivered the closing speech. I mentioned nothing of Damien, but I thanked Elias publicly. He stood, face unreadable, until the applause made him flush. I watched him, all 6'3" of quiet power, and I realized I didn't need him to love me. He already did. The edited footage leaked on a Tuesday. My press secretary woke me at 5:42 a.m. with shaking hands and a pale face. It's everywhere, she said. They're accusing you of forcing Damien's jump. Saying you planted the rocks? I said calmly, sitting up. Let them. You don't want to respond? I reached for my silk robe. Not yet. Let them foam at the mouth, I thought. Let them panic. The louder the mob, the quieter their memory of what came before. By noon my inbox had imploded. Investors were nervous. RGC stock dipped 6%. By 2 p.m., I was already seated in a conference room with my legal team. This is libel, one lawyer said. And the source is obvious. That footage was spliced. The timestamp overlay was faked. Trace it, I said. Publicly. Elias stood beside the digital board, flipping through slides of every media outlet that had shared the clip. It came from a burner server in a shared network, he said. But the original file was uploaded from a known RGC device. I didn't flinch. Damien. He nodded. Or someone acting for him. How long to launch a counteroffensive? 24 hours, Elias replied. But I've prepared something better. He tapped his laptop. The screen shifted to a video, grainy, dated clips stitched together. Damien, drunk at board meetings. Damien, berating interns. Damien, slamming his fist into a glass door during a shareholder call. The footage I'd quietly collected over the last 3 years. Release it all, I said. And add the voice memo. My voice. His threats. The slap. The silence afterward. Are you sure? Elias asked, eyes meeting mine. Yes, I said. I let him play God for long enough. The internet turned in 16 hours. The hashtags flipped from hashtag Camille the Destroyer to hashtag Justice for Camille to hashtag Fall of Reed. One outlet wrote. She didn't break him. He imploded trying to control her. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. I just poured a glass of wine and watched the empire burn. His this time, not mine. 3 days later I visited Damien. The nurses knew not to interfere. He lay in his rehab bed, frail despite the fine linens. The television above him was muted, frozen on a news headline with my face and his side by side. He didn't speak when I walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. I sat. Your last move, I said. That was ambitious. Clumsy. But ambitious. His voice was hoarse. You're ruining me. I laughed. No, Damien. You ruined yourself. I just gave the world a better camera angle. He blinked, slow. You don't have to keep going. I tilted my head. That's the difference between us. You needed me small. I don't need you at all. He turned his face away. I was scared. Of me. Of being irrelevant. You are, I said. I stood then, walked to the edge of his bed and leaned down. You know why I'm still your wife? His eyes found mine. Because when your mother dies and the Reed estate passes to the primary surviving spouse, it will pass to me. Tears gathered at the corners of his eyes. You said you loved me, he rasped. I did, I said. But you didn't love me. You loved controlling me. I pulled a document from my purse, a signed clause from our prenup that I never filed. Do you recognize this? His mouth opened, then shut. I fed it into the portable shredder at my side. Poetic, isn't it? He sobbed. Not loud, but helpless. The way only a man does when he realizes he's lost not just the war but the myth of himself. I walked to the door. Paused. Turned. You won't see me again. Camille, he whispered. I didn't look back. You were the only thing I ever believed in. I closed the door. Elias waited outside the facility, leaning against the hood of my car. Did he cry? He asked. Yes. Good. I smiled faintly. You sound colder than me. He deserves it. He deserves nothing. We drove back in silence. As we passed a billboard of the Heart Resilience Fund, with Elias's face beside mine, I realized something strange. I didn't feel victorious. I felt free. And that was better. The new nameplate on the glass doors read, Heartread Global. No hyphen. No middle ground. Just power rebranded. I didn't make a public announcement. There was no grand ribbon cutting or press conference. The city simply woke up one morning and saw a different name at the top of the skyline. No explanation, no permission. That's the thing about legacy. You don't inherit it. You take it. My office overlooked the East River. Floor-to-ceiling windows. Marble floors. Silent hallways filled with people who no longer whispered when I walked past. The desk Damien once had carved from reclaimed oak now sat in my name. Paper signed with a pen he once gifted me on our honeymoon. I never used it. I signed with my own. The one engraved with the name he tried to erase. On a Tuesday my father called. He left a voicemail. Camille, I hear you're expanding into Southeast Asia. There's a connection I'd like to introduce you to. Delete. No callback. He came in person the following week, sitting in the executive lobby for 2 hours before my assistant notified me. Shall I send him up? No, I said without looking up. But give him a bottle of water. It's hot today. That was all. The next day, I hosted a closed-door pitch session with international investors. Elias sat beside me, sharp suit, blue tie, clipboard in hand. He didn't need notes. He remembered everything. He's no longer a distraction, one of the directors murmured after the meeting. He's an extension of you. They were right. I no longer introduced him as my assistant or my partner. I didn't need a title for Elias. He simply belonged. That evening I stood barefoot in my penthouse kitchen, sipping a glass of honeyed bourbon while watching the skyline blink against the dark. The space was quiet. No footsteps echoing with resentment. No silence held hostage by tension. Just quiet. True quiet. Then I heard the door open, not with urgency but the casual rhythm of someone who no longer felt like a guest. Elias walked in holding a grocery bag and a takeaway coffee. I thought you might have skipped dinner again. I gestured to the untouched charcuterie tray on the table. Technically that's food. He smirked. Technically that's decor. He set down the groceries and walked to me. Then he simply stood there. Not needing anything. Not waiting. Just present. I got a call from Damien's nurse today, I said, swirling my drink. Elias arched a brow. And? He's stable. Quiet. No more tantrums. Just still. Good. I nodded. The rage has rotted out of him. And out of you? I turned slowly to face him. It's strange, I said. I spent years burning. And now that the fire's out, I don't miss the heat. Elias reached into his pocket and handed me a folded note. Inside it was blank. I looked up confused. I just wanted to give you something without asking for anything, he said. Sometimes people forget what that feels like. I folded the paper carefully and tucked it into my robe. Thank you. After he showered, Elias walked out in a fresh t-shirt and joggers, hair damp, eyes soft. The man I had once found crumpled on the edge of my estate was now tall, quiet, steady. An oak in human form. He handed me a cup of hot tea. Not coffee. Because that's what I needed after bourbon. He always noticed the small things. I didn't say thank you again. I just rested my head against his chest. Outside, the skyline shimmered like a crown. Mine now. Inside there was no speech, no vow, no label for what we had. There didn't need to be. This wasn't a love story. It was a power story. And somewhere along the way I chose both. As I watched Elias set the alarm, turn off the lights and return to the couch where I sat, I realized. This was peace. Not because I won. but because I stopped bleeding for people who didn't know how to bandage a wound. The final papers arrived on my desk a week later. Damien's mother had passed. Quietly. Predictably. With her gone, the final clause activated. Every remaining asset under the Reed estate transitioned. To me. Stocks. Real estate. Titles. I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just signed the paperwork and poured tea for two. Elias returned from the terrace. Something worth celebrating? He asked. Something finally ending, I replied. He set his mug down, then reached over and lightly brushed a loose strand of hair from my face. Not possessive. Just familiar. Then without fanfare he kissed my forehead. And I let him. I didn't need roses. I didn't need revenge anymore. I had reclaimed my name. My legacy. My silence. And I hadn't inherited any of it. I took it. The end.